Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Nathan Copinger, Product Marketing Manager here at JScrambler, and today we have what I believe will be an exciting session to take you through. And instead of a standard slide-by-slide presentation, we're going to make things a little bit more conversational as we take you through a deep dive into JScrambler's research on what TikTok and Meta's tracking pixels are actually doing on the websites that use them. And today with me, I have two great people. I have Gareth Boker, our head of security research, and David Alves, one of the security analysts who carried out this research. David, Gareth, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Looking forward to it.
Happy to be here.
So now before we kick things off, I just want to take a quick moment to give you all a little background on JScrambler. JScrambler was founded in 2010 as the pioneer of client-side security. For over 15 years, we've led the market in protecting the part of the organization that has historically been the least governed, the browser. Today, digital business executes in the browser. It's the point of data creation where your code, third-party services, and AI agents all converge to handle sensitive data. And we provide a unified client-side security platform that turns your enterprise policies into enforceable protection in the browser runtime. And to do this, we harden your first-party application logic against reverse engineering and tampering, and we also govern the behavior of third-party scripts on your website to prevent data leakage and help ensure continuous compliance with different regulations and mandates like GDPR, CCPA, and PCI DSS v4. And then we also have a couple of quick housekeeping rules I wanted to go through. The webinar will take about an hour. We have some time at the end reserved for Q&A. We definitely want to encourage interaction throughout this, so please ask questions, add comments to the chat throughout. We will try to answer some as we go through, as well as at the end during the dedicated Q&A session. Everyone who has registered for this webinar will receive an email with a recording afterwards. We'll have a few polls as well throughout here, so be prepared to help answer a few of those. And then we encourage you all to stick around and engage because we will be selecting some more of our active participants for a chance to win a caffeinated reward to help re-energize you after the webinar and all the participation we hope to have. So, now we're going to dive into it, and I kind of wanted to set the scene here a little bit before we really get into the research and cover what are ad tracking pixels. So, most businesses treat tracking pixels as pretty routine. You drop a snippet of code on your site, it helps you measure ad performance, retarget your users, see how they're using your website, just all that good stuff that your marketing teams love. But the research that we performed suggests the reality is a little different, or quite different, to be honest. Gareth, can you take us through a quick summary of what we found during our research?
Yeah, of course. So, um, in short, we conducted a runtime analysis of TikTok and Meta ad pixels on live websites. We were looking at large companies across retail, hospitality, and healthcare. And what we found is that these pixels go far beyond ad attribution. We saw them collecting personal data like emails, phone numbers, and addresses. They were harvesting detailed product level commerce data as well. We saw them collecting item prices, cart values, product names, and even the last four digits of payment cards as well. And in some cases, they're doing this before the user has even had a chance to make any kind of consent choice.
Got it. Thanks, Gareth. And looking forward to diving deeper into each of these points you mentioned. But before we do, we have a quick poll for everyone. We want to take a second to ask how many third-party scripts do you have on your website? And this isn't necessarily just Meta and TikTok. It can be any analytics tool like other ad tracking pixels, payment providers, AI chatbots and assistants, et cetera, that you have embedded on your website. We kind of want to gauge some awareness of the situation here and start to get everyone to think about this in terms of their own company's websites. So we'll let this run here for about a minute and then we can take a look at the results. Still got a few answers coming in here. I'll give it another couple seconds. All right, let's end the poll and take a look at the results. So it looks like we've got about 15% have about 1 to 10 scripts, 30% 11 to 50, 7% have 51 plus scripts on their site, and about 48% don't know for sure how many they have on their websites. So these are some good insights to see on how everyone's tracking this and how they're looking at this throughout their company and how aware they are. So definitely going to have some good takeaways for you, hopefully, at the end for those of you that don't know and how you can start to get a better handle on this. If it's a part of your responsibility, and if it's not, it's still potentially good for you to know for a few different reasons that we'll cover. Anything else you'd like to add, Gareth or David, on the results?
I mean, it's interesting to see that there's nearly 50% who don't know. I wonder whether that's just because maybe the people who are on here don't have any involvement in that side of things. But yeah, that's quite interesting, and interesting to see that massive peak there between 11 and 50. It shows people are using a lot of scripts on their sites.
Yeah, and also, yeah, I can agree with the last one because most people don't know what their website is running because they integrate so many things on their website that it's really difficult to know what it's really running. And yeah, sometimes they just don't know because there are too many.
Got it. Thanks, guys. So we will stop sharing these results and we will now get into the research. So let's start off with the identity piece because I think this is one that will often surprise people the most. Many assume their browsing is fairly anonymous. Maybe they're just looking at the IP address, general location, device type, browser types, things that aren't going to directly tie your browsing history and data with you as a person, just your general persona profile. Like you'd know me, I'm in my late 20s. I'm a male, live in the Midwest. That's really all they should know about me. But David, we found that these pixels are collecting a little bit more granular detail than that, like emails, phone numbers, and even personal addresses. Can you take us through how these pixels are doing that?
Yeah, so what these pixels providers do, in this specific case, TikTok and Meta, is that they look for any information that they can gather on the web page. Let's say, for example, the email address. They grab the email address that we are putting in some form, for example, a newsletter or other input, and they grab that email, they normalize it in SHA-256, and then they include that in their payload and they send that to their servers. So yeah, sorry. And TikTok has also a specific behavior that they split their capabilities in three separate data records: an interaction, an event record, and a metadata record, and a performance record. I'll I'll link it by the same session ID. Meta takes a similar approach, but they sometimes go a little bit further by hashing the locations, addresses, first name and last name, and they also use external identifiers.
And to emphasize what David said there, our research is about Meta and TikTok, but to be clear here, what we found applies to many other providers too.
And so, what about the hashing? So that is supposed to protect the data, right? And kind of make it more anonymous. Is that how it's working?
That's a good question. Hashing is not anonymization. If the hash is deterministic, like in this case, it's SHA-256, the same input will always generate the same output. For example, two websites generating an hash for John at example.com will generate the same hash, which makes it's a persistent identifier because yeah, the emails are guessable, and often these platforms have large amounts of emails, so they can just candidate match inputs on existing hashed user data to re-identify these people. So in practice, this is usually pseudo anonymization and not anonymization.
Yeah, as David said, hashing here really isn't anonymization. Another way to look at this is it's more like identity resolution, but with an extra step. So these platforms have billions of user accounts. When a hashed email comes in from a merchant's website, matching it back to a real person is fairly straightforward. Once you've done that, you can start building a behavioral profile across every site that runs the pixel. What someone browsed, what they put in their cart, what they bought, and it's all tied back to a real identity.
So it's not that they just know someone visited a page, it's they know exactly who visited and what they exactly did there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think where it gets really interesting, and I'm going to go beyond the research as I'm talking about this now, is if you think about what happens when you aggregate that across thousands of merchants, what you end up with is a commercial intelligence data set that no individual merchant could ever build on their own. The platform here sees the entire market, but the individual merchants will only ever see their own slice of it.
Got it. And David, did you see actual evidence of this cross-site profiling when you were running your analysis, or was it a little bit more of an inference from how these systems typically work?
What we can say that definitely is that we observe the collection mechanism in action, and that the hashed identifiers and session linked event data being collected were structured in a way that supports cross-site and cross-session correlation. What those platforms do on their server side, it's out of our scope because we can just ask Meta to access their servers. But that said, we saw previous reports about how Meta and TikTok use this data um, for other outcomes.
Yeah, and I think that's it's an important distinction there. So there is being quite rigorous there, which is exactly right. If you're a CISO or a DPO that's looking at this, the question isn't really whether TikTok or Meta are actively doing cross-site profiling today. It's that you're handing them everything that they would need to do it, and you've got zero visibility or control over what happens after that data leaves the browser.
Got it. So really, the amount of data they're potentially collecting on you, to me, is a little bit unnerving, especially for people who haven't even signed up for an account on these platforms. And also, real quick, got a question in the chat. Does this explain how Google starts showing you ads for things that you just purchased?
You,
That's pretty much it. Yeah. If they're
you
collecting that information from one place, using it elsewhere, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's not what you just purchased, it's also what you have seen. So if you see something and that triggered an event, they will know it, either by your email or by your phone number. There is always some piece of data that they can use to cross-reference.
Got it. Thanks, guys. All right. So let's talk about the commerce side of this because I think this is where things start to feel a little bit more like a business problem and not just a privacy one. So, David, during your research, what type of commercial data did you see these pixels collecting?
Okay, we saw cases where very detailed e-commerce telemetry was being collected, including product names, unit prices, quantities, currency, total cart values, and even the full page URL tied to the user interaction. Both Meta and TikTok routinely include that information in pixel requests. They also logged specific checkout stage actions such as add to cart and add payment info. And you can see that on this image. We went to some product, we went to the checkout flow, and as you see, there is an email there. It's a SHA, and the user agent, the event that triggered this, it's add payment info, and you can see that the product that I added to my cart, and the currency, the value, and the amount I spent on the platform.
Wow, okay. So really they're showing you not just a user converted on this page, it's that a user added 3 units of product X at this specific price. They entered their payment info, and then the checkout form that they used looks exactly like X, Y, Z, et cetera, really showing exactly what your checkout page looks like and your customer's behavior.
Yeah, that's an accurate summary, yes.
Got it.
Yeah, I think this is where the conversation shifts. It goes from a privacy problem to more of a business strategy problem. So if you think about it from a business perspective, what are you actually giving away here? You know, these entities, they're collecting things like the product catalog, your pricing, your conversion funnel, even the cart composition of your customers. All of this information is flowing into a platform that your competitors are also paying to advertise on. You know, the more data that the platform collects from all of these different merchants, the better its targeting is going to get. And better targeting tends to favor the advertisers with the biggest budgets.
So the implication here is that you're essentially subsidizing your larger competitors.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely one way to look at it. I'd probably put it a bit more broadly. You're contributing to a shared intelligence platform where that platform is the only party that can see the full picture. So every merchant sees their own dashboard, but the platform sees everyone's.
Gotcha. And David, do you think most businesses realize that this is happening, or is it happening without their knowledge?
Based on what we observed, it's very unlikely that most business fully understand the extent of this collection. These implementations often involve multiple moving parts, from third-party integrations to tag management, some platform defaults, and of course, websites can change from time to time. So that makes it really difficult to understand the flows of these pixels, what they are doing and what they are seeing. For example, in one case, we saw a matrix script that did not collect the email address directly. It was using Google Tag Managed to grab that information. So yeah, it was an indirect access that it's really interesting because they were not accessing directly to it. We also made some reports, and on those reports, we noticed that the teams didn't fully understand that this was happening. They said they had safeguards implemented, but yeah, they couldn't explain how this access and how the transmission was being made. So what a merchant may perceive as an ordinary analytics or conversion tracking can, in practice, enable more extensive collections than they intended or realized, because yeah, it's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah. Uh, I think that's probably the crux of it too. The gap between what merchants think these pixels do and what they actually do is enormous. You know, marketing teams will add a pixel, they'll see the attribution numbers, and they'll move on. And no one's really inspecting the network requests to see what's actually being transmitted.
Got it. So, in short, if you're not careful about the level of data that you're allowing these pixels to collect and putting controls in place, you're essentially inadvertently leaking proprietary commercial data that your competitors could benefit from without your knowledge. Does that kind of sum it up?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Got it. All right. So now we're going to get into the consent piece, which I believe is one that I've heard a lot of people are really looking forward to digging into, especially because this is where things start to get a bit legally uncomfortable. So, David, what did you end up finding around the consent management piece in your research?
During our research, we found out that TikTok Pixel were capturing sensitive information even before the user has done some sort of consent, either accept all, accept, or just a reject all. We have an image here that shows that specific case. The user is being prompted to make a choice, and the website is already loading all third-party scripts and tracking and metrics scripts. You can see there TikTok, Adobe, and Clarity MES. Some examples, and they were all already tracking and seeing what the user was doing on the page. We also we have other cases where we also observed two distinct implementation scenarios at major European retailers in which physical address was being sent to TikTok and Meta. The first involved an address as entered in the in-store locator field is some sort of field that most e-commerce websites have where you can put your postal code or your address to find the nearest store. So when you are interacting with that, if something is badly implemented, TikTok and Meta will collect that information and send it to their servers. We also have some examples where during the checkout phase, the user was prompted to choose between addresses, and Meta and TikTok were also accessing that information and sending it to to their servers. You can see that on the following image. You can see um, Meta showing that address there, and also this is also being sent on the URL, so it's all clear text. And same for TikTok. The TikTok is just in the payload, but yeah,
Got it. So just to clarify, when a user just types in their address, find a nearby store in that little locator box, TikTok can capture that.
correct. We observed cases where the address entered in those fields was captured by TikTok. Yeah.
Got it. And then we did get a quick question here. They're
The,
asking, do you have to use TikTok to collect this info, or will it still collect this info if you've never even used the platform?
can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Do you have to be a TikTok user for them to be collecting this info from you,
Oh,
or
no, no.
can you collect it from anybody?
This is just the pixel running on the page, and it will collect that information because it's configured on that way.
Yeah, and of course, if you've already got a TikTok account, it's then tying it back to that profile data as well. But it would collect that data anonymously, essentially, even if you don't have a TikTok account.
Yeah.
Got it. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. We also noticed that TikTok was accessing PCI information. So you can see here that TikTok was accessing the 4 digits of the credit card, the expiry date, um, uh, the expiry date, the card holder. Um, in other cases, it also captured the recipient full name and delivery addresses. When the user selected that information during the checkout process. A big part of the problem of these pixels often come with the default behaviors, like I was talking about, that are not fully understood, and sometimes the customizations that the owner of the website does to these pixels.
Got it. And is Meta doing anything similar when it comes to collecting this type of information?
Yeah, Meta also we also catch Meta accessing this information. So yeah, it has done the same behavior as TikTok.
All right, thank you, David. And Gareth, how would you react to this all from a compliance standpoint, especially like privacy regulations like a GDPR, CCPA, or over in China you have PIPL, PIPL. Yeah, I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, it's quite a difficult position if you're subject to any of these regulations. You've got consent failures, so you've got data that's leaving the browser before the user has made a choice. You've got inadvertent personal data transmission, so we saw the names, addresses, partial card data. And as David was saying, some of this data was transmitted in clear text within the URL itself. And obviously it's going over HTTPS, so it's on a secure connection, but that still means that it's sitting in browser histories, in server logs, and in any kind of intermediary caches that might exist. Businesses often have proxies and so on to see what people are doing. So I think the attack surface here is quite a bit broader than people tend to assume.
Got it. And I think the big question on everyone's mind is who's liable for this? Who are these regulators going to come after if there was a breach or a leakage found? Is it the platforms, Meta and TikTok, or is it the merchants, the businesses that are using these pixels on their websites?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it will change slightly from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, whether you're under GDPR or CCPA or whatever it might be. But I think no matter what, the answer is quite uncomfortable. Um, Focusing on GDPR, it's the data controller who is responsible for what happens to user data on the site. They may have relationships with those other entities like Meta and TikTok here, but ultimately they can't outsource accountability. If a pixel that you've chosen to install is exfiltrating data without consent of the user, regulators are going to be coming to you first. They may go to Meta or TikTok afterwards, and as well, but you're still the ones responsible for that. It doesn't matter that the behavior was a default that you didn't know about.
Got it. Thanks, Gareth. And David, in the research, it was mentioned that this data was being sent in clear text. Would you be able to expand on that a little bit for us?
Yes. So um, Meta was sending some of their reports through clear text on the URL, and you can see on this image that. So the issues is not they access the data. They also exposing that data to other systems. So these one key point is that this it reflects a bad implementation and also a behavior from pixels. So it's a combination of both that makes this happen. So a bad implementation from Meta that they are using an exfiltration through an URL, so that information goes on clear text and on the website because that information is being grabbed on the page.
And I think it's worth noting here that it's not one single failure, it's a chain of things. The pixel collects more than it is expected. The consent mechanisms aren't firing fast enough. You've got implementation defaults that are too permissive. There's the clear checks transmission, and that compounds the exposure. And each one of these on its own might seem manageable, but when you put them all together, it creates a situation where basically you're systematically leaking data that you didn't intend to share.
Got it. So yeah, it just seems like overall that the companies that are using these pixels, they just need to be really aware of all these different risks and aspects to make sure that they protect themselves and their customers. Because it's not like we're saying don't use these; they can be really helpful for a business, but you just need to make sure you're very aware of the risks that come with it, like anything you use, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. It's about, well, part of this is trying to inform people about what's going on so that they understand it. They can put safeguards in place as they need to.
Got it. Thanks, guys. All right. So there is one more angle I wanted to touch on before we get to discussing about the solutions and best practices you can use to help protect your business and from these risks. And it's something that came up for me when I was reading the research. I have a bit of a data security and privacy background, so it's something I'm particularly interested in. So beyond compliance, is there any actual security risks here? Could this data end up being used against the people it belongs to or the companies that are collecting it if something were to happen?
Yes, in my opinion, there is a real security concern here. For example, when partial card data such as the last four digits, expiration date, and cardholder names is combined with full names and delivery address, it creates a useful data set for profiling, identity theft, account abuse, and social engineering. And because some of the data can end up in clear text in the URL, these are real privacy and compliance issues. This this becomes a huge privacy and compliance issue.
Got it. So it's not just that this data is going directly to TikTok and Meta, but it is potentially exposed along the way before it even gets there.
Yeah, that's correct. The exposure is not limited to the pixel endpoint itself, to TikTok or Meta servers. If sensitive data is placed in clear text, it may also be recorded by other parts on the delivery path, including server logs, CDN, proxy logs, and other monitoring systems.
And I think this is the bit as well that tends to get overlooked in the compliance conversation. GDPR, CCPA, and so on, they're all about consent and data governance, and obviously that's important. But I think there's a more practical question here. Are you creating the conditions here for a secondary data breach? So it's not a breach of your own systems, But we're talking here about a breach that your site caused, this data to be scattered across logs and caches that you don't control. And it's not a great thought really, but if a user's partial card data and their home address, maybe that ends up in a third-party server log somewhere because of a pixel that you installed, and then there's a breach, there's an argument there that you've contributed to whatever happens next.
Got it. And the merchant might never actually know this is happening throughout all this.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's the nature of it. This is data that you never intended to share. It's sitting in places that you never intended it to reach, and you've got no real visibility into any of it either.
Got it. All right. Well, thanks guys for going over that with me. It was definitely interesting to hear, especially from someone who is a bit more, who's pretty interested in the security aspect of things. So now before we move on into what you can do to protect your organization from these risks, we do have another poll for you. So after everything we covered, we also wanted to gauge the level of oversight here that you have in place when it comes to tags and pixels that are being added to your website. So essentially, can marketing add tags and pixels without a security or privacy review? And we'll let this one run for about a minute, and then we'll take a look at the results. All right, looks like the answers are winding down here. I'll give it another 5 seconds, and then we'll take a look. All right, so here's what we've got in. We have 24% of our respondents said that yes, they can add marketing tags without security analysis. 36% say no, so that's great to see. And then we're at about 40% that are not sure whether they can or cannot add these tags. So that's great to see that a good amount have control on this, or at least doing some level of review. And then for those that aren't going through these reviews or aren't particularly sure, maybe it's not a part of your wheelhouse to know so. But hopefully, as we dive into these best practices, you can take some of this back and implement at your business or your organization to make sure that you're secured against these risks. Gareth, David, anything else you'd like to add here before we hop in?
I was just thinking it's interesting. So nearly two-thirds are either yes, tags can be added without just a security analysis, or don't know. So that kind of sounds bad initially. And I think a lot of this is going to be contextual, isn't it? It depends whether those sites are collecting personal data, whether they're selling stuff. So they may be collecting cardholder data. If it's a healthcare website, for example, all of this is going to be critical in terms of the severity of any of this. That's kind of a key part here. But any time that you're collecting any kind of sensitive data, personal data, PII, whatever it might be, there are specific requirements that you have, specific regulations that apply, and so it's important that you understand what each of those tags, what those pixels are doing.
Yeah, also there should always be a procedure when implemented this kind of pixels because it, if someone decides to put something on the website that you aren't aware, that is a real security problem because anyone can add stuff on your website just because they want some extra metrics, and what you are gaining might be um, small in what you are going to lose later because you might have some data leaks, for example, some healthcare leaks, and that will result in massive fines later on.
Got it. Thanks for the insight, guys. All right, so now we'll move on and talk about solutions. So if you're all watching this and thinking, we have these pixels on our site, where do we start? David, would you be able to take us through what your research suggests that they do?
Yeah. Um, you need to know what the scripts are actually doing on your website at runtime, what they can access, what they can collect, how that data is being transmitted and handled, not just what the documentation says. You can trust that because yeah, stuff can change. And in this case, that means looking not only at what the pixels, but also what other third-party scripts do. We had one before that was a script using Google Tag Manager to access that information. So from there, you need some runtime controls that can restrict access to sensitive fields and block unauthorized data exfiltration in real time.
Got it. So, and what about some of the simpler stuff here? Can you turn off some of these features that come by default with these pixels that we've talked about a bit, like the advanced matching or automatic events?
Yeah, yes, you can and you should. And you need to look really close to what those default features are doing and how they have been enabled or were customized because that customization and that default can bring serious issues. Take Meta, for example. Features such as advanced matching or automatic events may be useful for marketing, but they can also expand what data is accessed and transmitted. That is why those settings need to be reviewed carefully, tested, uh, and never just left them on default. In some, you need to test what you do to see if that is going the way you want.
Got it. Thanks, David. And Gareth, what's your take on the broader strategy here?
I'd probably frame it in three layers here. So first off, audit, understand what's actually happening on your site right now. Most organizations have got really no idea how many third-party scripts. We saw that in the first poll. People don't know how many scripts there are, let alone what they're doing. Second, enforcement. So you need to have some technical controls. They need to operate at runtime. Policies, documentation alone won't catch a pixel that's silently changed its behavior in an update. These things do change regularly, and people need to keep on top of that. And third, given that these things change regularly, make it continuous. It's not a one-time exercise. Pixel behaviors change all the time. New features, as we've seen, they get added by default. The tag that your marketing team added last quarter might be behaving differently today.
Got it. And that's that scope creep problem that we mentioned in the research. And essentially, you might have done a review when you initially added it. You might have signed a processing agreement, a contract. But if you're not really monitoring these as they continue to update, that your contracts could be violated. They could be collecting more data than what you agreed upon.
Yeah, exactly that. A tag starts out doing exactly what you expect. 6 months later, it's collecting data that you never authorized. David was talking about this earlier on when we contacted one merchant that we discovered where they were sending data that they weren't expecting to be doing. When we spoke to them, it was a behavior that had changed in that script. So, if you're not monitoring continuously, ultimately you won't catch it until maybe a regulator or a journalist, or if you're lucky, someone like Jay Scrambler does.
Got it. And then there was that consent timing issue that David had raised. Is there a practical fix that people can implement there?
Like we discussed it before. The practical fix is to implement and properly test the mechanisms that control script loading, so you can be sure that scripts or other analytics or metrics or other third parties are not loaded before the user has made his consent choice. In practice, that means the consent platform has to actively gate these scripts from loading, not just set a flag and just pray for it to work. Companies also need to be careful with region-specific enforcement because rules can change from country to country. For example, the GDPR, CCPA, and other norms that need to be taken into account when configuring these type of scripts.
Yeah, I'd reiterate David's point as well. Test it. Don't just configure it. and assume it works. Actually go through your site as a user, reject all cookies, look at the network requests, and you might be surprised at what's still firing. I think the gap between intent and reality, that's really where the risk lives here.
Got it. And that's kind of like you really need to take zero trust then to these. It's never trust, always verify. Make sure they're doing what you expect and don't just assume they're sticking to what they're saying.
Exactly, yeah.
Got it. Awesome. So thanks for taking us through that, guys. I hope everyone found those helpful and could potentially take them back to their teams to implement back at their organizations to help ensure they're covered. So. While the focus on this webinar has been to cover our research and discuss how organizations can protect themselves in general, as a product marketing manager here at JScrambler, I did want to take a quick minute to cover how JScrambler can help you implement some of these controls and best practices that we covered in the previous slides, and give me a minute to practice my pitch. So just to go through this real quick, so make sure we have enough time for Q&A. So JScrambler extends data governance and privacy beyond the traditional perimeter into the browser at runtime. We provide comprehensive visibility into every third and fourth party script that's running on your website. Then we map what sensitive form fields, data, and other elements on your web pages that these scripts can access and process to really help you understand where that sensitive data that is being entered by your customers into your website is at risk. And also, while it might not be directly related to you all, as you work with your security teams to implement different controls and platforms that will help you address these, we can also point out that JScrambler can help with the new OWASP Top 10 updates that recommend that you need to track all of the components and their versions, both client side and server side. So JScrambler can help them with that server side component of the software supply chain security aspect in OWASP Top 10. And I do believe that this research highlights some of the importance of that as well and why that raised from 6 to 3 in the 2025 top 10. And then additionally, the platform monitors these scripts' activity to detect when they start accessing or transferring sensitive data without approval, expanding that scope. And then we also provide the controls needed to enforce these different governance, security, and privacy policies in the browser at runtime, using things like form fencing to restrict script access to different parts of the website, effectively enforcing least privilege. And then we can also block malicious activities as we detect them to help stop threats before they can steal your data. And then finally, we provide a comprehensive audit trail of activities of these third and fourth party scripts that you can provide to your auditors, regulators, to show that you have evidence that these controls are in place and that you're working to protect your customers' data the moment it's being entered into the website. All right. I appreciate y'all letting me go through that. So we're going to open up here Q&A in just a moment. Before we do, I just wanted to get the final thoughts of our presenters here. David, we'll start with you. If there's one thing you'd like people to take away from the research, what would it be?
Yeah, yeah. In my opinion, the main takeaway from this research is that you need to approach these pixels and third parties in a zero trust mindset. Do not assume do not assume everything is static. Follow the best practice, test routinely, and monitor continuously because your website changes over the time. It evolves. Um, yeah, also your integration change, your third parties can change from time to time, so that so their scripts. So something that looked fine a few months ago might not be fine today. So yeah, just monitor and pay attention to what your site is loading.
Got it. Thanks, David. And Gareth, how about you?
I think I echo everything that David said there. And I'd just add as well, it's not just a privacy problem. It's a competitive intelligence problem too. Every day these pixels run unchecked. You're potentially giving away data that has real commercial value. And the good news here is that it is fixable, but it requires treating client-side security with the same kind of rigor that you'd apply to server-side infrastructure.
Awesome. Thanks, Gareth. And thank you as well, David. So now we are going to officially open for Q&A, questions from the audience. So please enter any questions you have into the chat, and we've be happy to answer them. We've got about 13 minutes to the top of the hour. So um, if you have any questions, let us know. And there was one actually that came in while we were talking. So Daniel asks, to what extent, if any, does the use of a VPN interfere with this data collection?
It won't interfere because they are collecting this information from the page. It's not your IP that it's being leaked. It's information that you are inserting on the page or just by filling a newsletter form, purchasing some item. So the VPN won't solve your problem here because it's on the page itself.
Yeah, all you're doing really is replacing one problem with another one. If you're sending your data across your ISP's network, then they can get some information. Things like HTTPS make it much more difficult these days to really understand what people are doing, but there's still some sort of signal information that they can get where you're connecting to, what those websites might be doing, even if they can't see what you're doing there, for example. What you're doing when you use a VPN is you're preventing your ISP from being able to see that stuff, but now it's the VPN provider. They're the exit point onto the internet. They now get that access as well. Some of them do provide, various different privacy tools that you can install, but really it's those privacy tools that are making the difference there, not the VPN itself.
Yeah, also another thing that is if you live in Europe and you're using a VPN that connects you to the United States, on the United States, that website might not be forced to use a, a policy management. So you might just have all those third-party scripts loading, and that will be another problem. So yeah, you need to pay attention to that also.
Got it. Thanks, guys. Looking through some of these questions here. Here's one from an anonymous. You recommended continuous monitoring because pixel behavior can change silently. How often do these platforms actually push updates to their pixel code that could change what data they collect?
It varies a lot. You see some scripts updating, multiple times a week. Some might be changing a few times a year. It varies, but particularly when it comes to things like, ad managers, analytics packages, and so on, these are the ones that tend to be updating more frequently. They will be adding in more features as we've seen, and just trying to make that information capture better. But equally, that means they're potentially accessing more data and so on too.
Got it. All right. Another one. Should you have a tag manager load your cookie manager slash consent management platform script, or have them load concurrently? What's the best practice there?
Can you repeat the question? I missed the first one.
Um, should you have a tag manager load your cookie manager or consent management platform script, or should it load concurrently? What's the best practice?
You're talking about loading the pixel in parallel with the consent and tag manager. Is that it?
It's whether to load it through the tag manager or not, I think. So,
You can load it, but yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
I think from a best practice perspective, it probably makes more sense to load the tag manager separately from the CMP there. You run the risk of anybody who can access the tag manager potentially removing the CMP. The other aspect of that as well is that the CMP isn't able to put any controls in place around the tag manager either. So, it's important to understand, particularly with a CMP, what it's doing, when it's doing it. Once somebody allows all cookies or decides to reject them, what that then means for the knock-on to all of the other scripts. Um, it's it's not an easy one to kind of answer generically, but I think generally as a best practice, keep things separate where you can. Maybe keep the tag manager for just things that are maybe marketing related, and equally then the CMP, if that's able to put the controls on the tag manager, it may also be able to apply those controls further down the line too.
Yeah.
Great. Another question we have here, got a few minutes left. So many rely on safe harbor or data processing agreements with Meta and TikTok. In your view, do these legal documents provide any actual protection if the pixel is found to be scraping sensitive data?
Well, that's a question for lawyers to begin with. I think anything to do with legal documents, legal agreements is something that a legal team or legal person would need to look at and provide an opinion on. Um, I think taking a step back, though, um, thinking about it from a GDPR perspective, you have the concept in Europe of data controllers. They're people who are, requesting the data themselves, managing the data themselves. You also have the kind of a joint data controller uh, sort of aspect where you might control your data and you might be allowing an entity like Meta or TikTok to also be a data controller on there. So they can then do what they want with that data. You need to consider what the agreements are that are in place between you and those entities. And also there's the aspect of a data processor. So that's like a third party that are processing that data for you. They should only be doing what you're asking them to do. So if any of these, ad managers, tag managers, whatever, if they're saying that they're a data processor, you really need to understand what controls you have over your data when it's held by these third parties. What are they doing with it? What, is what they're doing what you're expecting? Does it match what's in your privacy policy and so on? Certainly in the research that we did, we saw several cases where the privacy policies of these websites didn't match up with what the pixels were doing.
Got it. That actually kind of leads into another question here. Is are Meta and TikTok upfront about the extent of data collection in their terms and conditions prior to the merchant putting tracking pixels on their website? I did read there's TikToks, and I did find that they did say they won't share your commercial data with the algorithm without your consent. I did not see whether or not they actually asked that or if that's by default, but curious if there's any other aspects of that you guys have looked into as well, myself.
Yeah, it's complicated. We could probably do a whole webinar on that, to be honest with you. But high level, um, there are terms and conditions. They detail what companies that are using these pixels are required to do, how they're being set up, and so on. But then there's also the privacy policy as it applies to end users. Um, how many of these things do people see that they just click through and ignore? Um, I think the worst one is where you get a consent management platform that says something like, we and our 963 partners would like to share this data. If if you as a user of that website are seeing that, chances are you're not going to be going to all 963 websites to look at the privacy policies for each and every one of those different partners there. And so, is that really consent? I don't really think it is. It's certainly not informed consent. Um, so yes, the information is out there. Companies like Meta, like TikTok, I think they do have very good information that's out there, but it's very information dense. And the expectation that people are actually going through and reading, tens of thousands of words of information to be able to make that decision, I don't really believe most people are doing that.
Right. Yeah. And also, it kind of, I believe, goes back to a CCPA case a little while back with Healthline Media that essentially it was just because it's in the terms and conditions doesn't mean you have carte blanche to go and collect everything that you can. Just because you wrote it down, you really, with a lot of these new privacy laws, you need to have actual reason to collect this data, right?
Yeah, there's definitely a distinction to be made between the data that you're collecting for a specific purpose and then reusing that data for other purposes. If I collect your email address in order to be able to provide, a report to you, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can use it for other purposes. Or if you do, you should be collecting consent separately for that. So it's kind of a complicated situation. I think the main thing is really being clear and upfront about what you're doing with that information from the outset. And if it's not for a clear defined purpose, giving people the option to be able to opt out of it.
Got it. All right. I think we have time for one more quick question. One here is when pixels collect information, albeit no consent is given by the user, is that expected behavior or is it a misconfiguration?
It's a misconfiguration, because there should be something gating that pixel from loading from start, waiting for the user to consent. So it's a bad implementation.
Yeah, I agree completely with that, particularly when it comes down to a consent management platform, because the key there is consent. You've not obtained consent at the point that that pixel is then sending that information across. Um, Within GDPR and with other privacy legislation, there's also legitimate interest. So they potentially could be arguing that it's a legitimate interest, but there's more that you need to do if it's a legitimate interest. You need to have actually done privacy impact assessments and so on in order to validate that what you're collecting is for a legitimate interest and so on and so forth. I think that the reality is that when companies are using a consent management platform, they are then relying on the consent mechanism for privacy. And yes, if in those cases information is being sent prior to getting consent, it's a misconfiguration. Those scripts are doing what they're designed to do, but they're also designed to be enabled after that consent is obtained. That consent hasn't been obtained, and they're already enabled. That's essentially a bug.
Yeah,
Got
one thing about the consent managers is that sometimes they are not as straightforward as they should be. Sometimes you need to make your selections and they are not so straightforward when allowing you to choose really quick. Sometimes you get just a 200 list scripts that you need to individually unselect them also. Yeah, that is also a problem.
Right. Got it. That's great insight. Thanks, guys. So we are just about here at time at the top of the hour. So we really appreciate everyone joining us today for this deep dive. If we didn't have a chance to answer your question, please feel free to reach out to us. We have our contact at jscrambler.com. You can follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our newsletter to get all the latest updates in client-side security and the research that we are here performing at JScrambler. Also, just wanted to take a quick second to thank our presenters here, Gareth and David, on taking us through this deep dive. I really appreciate it and hope everyone found it informative and can take some of this back to their organizations. And yeah, just want to thank everyone again for joining us, and we hope to see you again and that you all have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.